This episode of Around the Oval is brought to you by Todd Pennington with Revolution Mortgage. Hey, Ohio State fans, Alex Gleitman here, back with another edition of Around the Oval, brought to you by Todd Pennington with Revolution Mortgage. The first game for Ohio State is in the books. It was a close one, and it was a scary one at times, but the Buckeyes escaped the Twin Cities with a victory over Minnesota to advance to 1-0 on the season and enter the matchup I think everyone has been looking forward to, probably since last year when the contest in Eugene was canceled, obviously due to most schools around the country going to an in-conference schedule only because of the global pandemic. But the Oregon Ducks will travel to Columbus this weekend, Saturday, noon Eastern, the big noon kickoff game on Fox. And to preview the big matchup between number 11 Oregon and number 3 Ohio State is Matt Prehm from 24/7 Sports Oregon site, DuckTerritory. Matt, thanks for joining the show. Appreciate your time today.
Absolutely. Happy to be here and excited for this game to actually be played. I wish it was reciprocated back to Eugene earlier, but we'll get that game probably in the 30s, it sounds like.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see where each program is at there. I always think it's funny when games get scheduled that far in advance. I remember like Ohio State scheduled Washington in the early 2000s, and the game was played in 2013, 2014, something like that. And Washington was nowhere near what they were in the early 2000s. So hopefully both of these programs are still at the top of college football. And I was really looking forward to getting out to Eugene. Heard it's an awesome time there. And I think a lot of the Ohio State fans were too. So hopefully that's sooner versus later, but we'll table that for now. And we'll talk about this week's game, which I think is going to be a really good one. I know Ohio State, to their fans, maybe didn't look the best. Oregon, to their fans, maybe didn't look the best. Spread opens up at around 2 touchdowns, which I thought was a little higher than what it was going to be. I know that obviously Oregon didn't look great. It's in Columbus. There's potentially some injuries for the Ducks, although there are some for the Buckeyes as well, I think. But before we jump into all that in this specific matchup, talk to me about, Oregon's expectations heading into this year. For me, I actually had them as the Pac-12 favorite. I'm not fully buying USC under Clay Helton. I know UCLA with a big win over LSU has kind of emerged as a possible dark horse, but I had Oregon. I just think Mario Cristobal is such a good coach. I think he has them as tough as they've ever been on both sides of the line. I think they obviously have some really talented players and some veterans throughout their roster. But what was the expectations from both you and the fan base on Oregon heading into the season this year?
I think most people within the fan base, most people within the media viewed this team. They're kind of in a weird spot where they are the Pac-12 favorites to win the league. The expectation is for them to win the league, get to the Rose Bowl, but not be good enough to be a playoff team, where they're a conference champ, but they're not playoff caliber. That's how I viewed this team. I think if they play 12 regular season games, they probably go 10-2. And that's not going to be good enough to get into the college football playoff with 2 losses, but they're going to be one of the better football teams in the country. They're expected to be, loaded on the defensive side of the football. I think among the various drafts that will come out in the NFL in the next 3 years or so, they're going to have 3 to 5 guys that are first round or second round draft picks on this current team right now, including Kayvon Thibodeaux, who's the number 1 pick or projected to be number 1 pick right now in the 2022 NFL draft. And that will depend upon is there a team that needs a quarterback? Because if a quarterback is needed, Kayvon Thibodeaux won't go number 1. But a lot of people have him as the best overall player. And, they're going to step on a field with him if he's healthy and know that they've got the best player playing in that game, regardless of who they're facing for the most part. And then Noah Sewell, Justin Flo are 2 other guys that are going to be first round draft pick type players. And then Mikael Wright's a cornerback that's also got first round potential at that cornerback position. So defensively, the expectation is that this defense is elite when healthy. Obviously, the first week of the season has shown that things don't go as planned from a health standpoint. Offensively, I think they are probably going to be a top 25 offense. I would be utterly shocked if they finish the year as one of the most explosive offenses in the country. I just don't think they're built to be that. They're more of the ground and pound team that kind of wears you down. And in the fourth quarter, maybe has some big explosion plays to pull away. So I don't think this is a team. And Crystal Ball's teams have never been, the offenses that the last time these two teams have played in the national championship game, the spread offense where if they score 42 points, that's a low scoring performance. That's what Oregon used to be, but that's not their expectations anymore offensively.
Yeah, I think a lot of fans listening will be surprised to hear that. When you think of Oregon, you think of those Chip Kelly, Mark Helfrich, I guess to some extent, offenses that scored a ton of points, couldn't really stop anyone, but scored a ton of points usually. And I think as I was kind of saying in my intro, Mario Cristobal, I think, has brought a different mindset and approach to this team and has made them tough on both sides of the trenches, and just has a different mindset. And so I think you can expect, I don't want to say it's not going to be, a high scoring offense, but I think you could probably, and Mario Cristobal obviously comes from those, Miami teams way back when. He coached at Alabama. I think what you're going to see is probably closer, not now from what you see from Alabama, but what you saw from Alabama when he was there in the, the 2010s, I guess, early 2010s, if you will, with the Derrick Henrys and those types of offenses before they got, with the mobile quarterbacks and the, tons of talented receivers and things like that. I think, as you said, they're going to wear you down and all that. But I mean, they did score quite a few points against Fresno State. It seemed like, I know there was injuries and some guys missing, but it seems like they did have some trouble with the Fresno State offense, especially on the ground. Talk to us a little bit about what you saw in that first game. I mean, obviously Ohio State had a close game. Oklahoma had a close game. Washington lost to Montana. Iowa State had a scare against an FCS team. So plenty of teams, come out the gate and are just rusty and have some things to work on. But what did you see in that first game? I think, fans from Ohio State, at least for me out East, I wasn't able to, watch because we don't have the Pac-12 network, but people just see the score and they followed along online or whatever and just saw that it was a close game. But tell us a little bit about what you saw. Was it at all concerning for you?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think first and foremost, Fresno State's going to be a team that's going to win anywhere from 8 to 10 games. They might win the Mountain West Conference. They have a former starting Washington quarterback as their starting quarterback, Jake Haener. They have a 4-star receiver that started football games at Washington, and Ty Jones that starts for them. They have a 4-star receiver in Jalen Cropper, who's their top guy. And he chose to play for the hometown team, Fresno State. He's from the area, over playing for Pac-12 schools that offered him scholarships. Their running back is the school's all-time leader in touchdowns with over 45. So offensively, Fresno State is really good. I think if they played in the Pac-12, they probably are going to be a bowl eligible team. I watched the Minnesota game against Ohio State. I think Fresno State's probably just a little bit below Minnesota from a talent standpoint, from what they've been, what they can do. It wouldn't surprise me if those two teams played and it went 5-5 in 10 games. Fresno State's a really solid program. And I think they also had an advantage over Oregon because they played week 0. They played a game before the Ducks did, but that does not excuse Oregon only winning this game by 7 points. That was a game in which they should have won by 3 scores. They didn't necessarily have to cover, which was a 20.5-point spread, but you needed to win that game by 3 scores. That was one in which, Oregon is the 9th most talented team in the country, according to the talent composite on 24/7 Sports. And that did not show itself against Fresno State. So that is a cause for concern. Now, what happened that was positive for Oregon? They were stout against the run. Fresno State only ran for 77 yards. They could literally do nothing. They became a very one-dimensional football team. And the thing that, while they did throw for 298 yards, the positive from that is Oregon was playing a zone defense. They were giving extremely soft cushions on the outside at cornerback. And basically they said, we think you can't go down the football field in a dink and dunk style without making a mistake and turning the football over. And so they sacrificed yards to prevent the big play. And the big play never really happened. There was only one. It did result in a touchdown, but Fresno State basically was getting 7, 8, 9, 10, 15 yards when they threw the football, but nothing really down the football field. And their strategy worked because they felt like the defense would be able to create turnovers, and they did. They forced 3 of them, and they scored 20 points off those turnovers. So Oregon's defense gave up some yardage. They also played a really solid receiving core, and they broke in a bunch of freshmen that were playing because of suspensions at other spots. But it was a game in which they didn't play their best. They probably played like a B- level game. They found a way to win. And I think sometimes in these blowout FCS type games, they're always fun because, hey, the offense puts up a ton of points. You get a bunch of new guys into the game, what have you, and that's valuable. But the flip side is you don't really get tested. You don't really know what your team is like in a pressure situation. And so if you want to look at it from a half glass full type of a view, Oregon's gone through a pressure situation already in the first week of the season and knows that the defense can make the plays that are needed to get the ball back for the offense. And then the offense knows that in a pressure situation, they can drive down the football field when they have to score and execute and score touchdowns. So, it wasn't the cleanest game. It wasn't the game that everyone expected out of this team, but they still went 1-0. They still had plenty of areas in this game where they dominated, and their confidence now can go up a little bit because they've been able to check a couple of those boxes off.
Yeah, no, I think, to your point, being battle tested in week 1, I think is something that Ohio State fans know and understand the value of pretty well. They obviously had to overcome some adversity in their first game with some inexperienced players due to injury, due to CJ Stroud making his first start on the road in the rain against a quality opponent. So some similarities there, I think, in the value being taken away from each of those openers and how it could benefit both teams moving forward. Now, let's get into this game. I think the big thing a lot of Ohio State fans want to know about is the injury status of Kayvon Thibodeaux, whether you were able to watch the game or not. I think it was well aware that he came out of the game, went back in, came back out, was seen in a walking boot. I think when that happened, a lot of Ohio State fans assumed there was zero chance he's going to play, but it seems like at least the prognosis was a positive one. I think for everyone, Ohio State fans may want him to sit out this game, but I think everyone wants him to be healthy. He's one of the best players in college football, if not the best, as you said. So let's start with KT. Where are things at with him? And then if you could just run down some of the injury status of some other players. I know there's some rumors about Justin Flo, and then, Drew Mathis, the team is going to be out, and there might be a few other players of note that Ohio State fans would want to know about coming into this game.
Yeah, KT has an ankle sprain. And it's been very tight-lipped since Monday with Cristobal in the program. And, you speak to our sources and they're very tight-lipped because they're well aware that Ohio State is paying attention to what these reports are coming out. And, they want to play into this, if he is going to play, the best they can and create, uncertainty. He had x-rays that came back negative. He is in a walking boot, but that's standard practice at Oregon. Even if you're an athlete at Oregon, regardless of sport, and you just step off the sidewalk wrong and turn your ankle just the slightest, you immediately go into a boot for the next week. Do I think KT plays? Yes. Do I think KT is close to 100%? No. He's going to be limited if he does play. Other guys that are playing in this game, or that played in Fresno State that got hurt. Drew Mathis, he started at linebacker, but he was sharing the job with Justin Flo. And I don't think really, no offense to Drew Mathis, and he probably would even admit this himself, he's not as good as Justin Flo is. He's a senior. He knows the playbook more. He knows the reads more. He knows the techniques better than Justin Flo, that's why he was starting over Justin Flo, not because he just is a physically more talented player. He has the better acumen right now for the playbook. Now, Flo, there's a lot of rumors with him. We're at our site, we're certainly looking into those. We haven't heard anything that confirms that he is hurt, but we also haven't been able to confirm that he's 100% playing. And this kind of goes into line with the stuff with KT is, I think Oregon got word of this, and whether he is hurt or not, they've gotten word that it's out there, and they will play into that. Mario Cristobal is very into shutting everything down, providing very little information on certain things when it gets out there. When it is a season-ending injury or when it is a major injury, he does come out though and will admit that. He did not admit anything about Justin Flo being hurt in this football game. Other guys that did have injuries or get hurt or suspensions, what have you. Jamal Hill and DJ James, two guys that were at the beginning of the season viewed as starters. Jamal Hill started last year at the nickel spot. He was one of the better players in the Pac-12 championship game with 2 interceptions. And then DJ James was kind of viewed as the de facto starter at corner opposite Mikhail Wright. He played a lot the last 2 seasons for Oregon. They were both suspended due to an off-field incident the day before fall camp happened on August 3rd. So they didn't return to the team until I want to say late August, maybe a week and a half or so before their first game against Fresno State. They were deemed unavailable for Fresno State, and then they were listed as available and on the depth chart for Ohio State. DJ James is in a 3-way battle with Triquez Bridges, who started at corner, and also Dante Manning, a 5-star freshman, for that starting job. I imagine DJ James will probably eventually move back into that job full time. Maybe not against Ohio State, but he'll play. It'd be pretty shocking if he doesn't. Jamal Hill, he is backing up Bennett Williams. There is no or next to his name at the nickel spot. And Bennett though came out and said, like, he was brutally honest. Like, look, we're both going to play. And he said that the coaches have told them that Bennett's starting, but Jamal is going to play a ton, just like they did last year. They rotated quite a bit. So I expect Jamal Hill to be out there as well, and that's going to be a huge boost for this secondary, because it was basically Pharaoh McKinley, who was a 3-year starter out of the, one of the safety spots, Mikhail Wright, who is going to be a 3-year starter this season for Oregon, and then a bunch of freshmen or a bunch of guys that didn't play a ton of football the last year or so. Bennett Williams was a newcomer in 2020 and played a handful of snaps. Jordan Happel is a backup safety that came from Boise State as a pseudo starter for the Broncos. He played a little bit in 2020. Steve Stevens hardly played in 2020. He's a sophomore that started this year at safety. So, and then they have got a whole bunch of freshmen at cornerback. So they just had a bunch of inexperience in that secondary outside of Wright and McKinley. And if you add James and you add Hill back into the mix, this secondary goes back to being pretty loaded from an experience standpoint.
Yeah, and let's talk about some of the personnel a little bit more. On offense, let's start. What do the Ducks like to do on offense, and let's just give us 3 players that fans need to watch and know about.
Well, offensively, they like to run the football. They like to be a physical downhill rushing attack. So naturally, I'll give you a couple more just because they rotate CJ Verdell and Travis Dye at running back. They're listed as co-starters. They've been co-starters the last 3 seasons. They're both seniors. They've started every game that they've been at Oregon together. So those are those 2 guys will get the big bulk load of carries for Oregon. They like to wear you down so that in the fourth quarter, Dye is more of a shifty speed guy. Verdell is more of a power guy. That combination can kind of be tough to deal with if you get tired. And then offensively, when they do throw the football, they have some big time receivers, some taller guys. They're all younger players though. Devin Williams, a transfer from USC, Troy Franklin, Dante Thornton, 2 freshmen this season. All 3 of those guys are 4-star recruits. You know, when they came out of high school, we're kind of in that discussion to maybe become 5-star receivers. Never really got there, but they were always kind of viewed in that manner. And then on the outside, they like playing Johnny Johnson. He's a 4-year starter at receiver. Micah Pittman's another 4-star receiver in the slot. And those are probably Oregon's 2 most reliable receivers, but they're, you know, sub 6 foot guys. They're 5'11", 5'10" type players. And so those would be the guys I would look for. When they do throw, they want to be aggressive. They want to take shots, or they want to take some intermediate stuff across the middle.
Yeah, and flipping a defense, what kind of scheme do the Ducks play on the defensive side of the ball and outside of Kayvon Thibodeaux? I know you named a bunch already, but who are going to be the biggest guys that CJ Stroud and Ryan Day are going to want to be aware of where they are on when they're out in the field on offense?
Yeah, so they run like a multiple front defense, and so sometimes it'll look like a 2-5-4. Sometimes it'll look like a 3-3-5 type defense, and other times, if they feel like it's a run situation, they'll go a 4-3-4 defense. So it's best described just as multiple. They move guys around. Sometimes KT will be a traditional hand in the dirt. Sometimes he'll be on the edge, standing up and dropping back into pass coverage. So they like to, you know, move guys around. They like to have you kind of worried about what Oregon is running and trying to disguise it so it looks like a 4-3, but it's more like a 3-5 or something of that nature. Other players to know besides Kayvon Thibodeaux, Brandon Dorales is a defensive lineman for Oregon that's really stood out in his first 2 seasons for the Ducks. Can play D and or can play nose defensive tackle. Popo Amave is their nose tackle, a guy that really came on strong in 2019, played better than Jordan Scott, who was a 4-year starter for the Ducks, and graduated in 2020. There was some thinking going into the 2020 season before COVID hit that Jordan could potentially lose his job because of Popo's play in 2019 towards the second half of the year. Popo got COVID and that never really materialized during 2020. Pharaoh Mckinley, I mentioned him already, 3-year starter at safety, really smart dude. Probably one of the smartest guys on the team, knows everything where he needs to be. He's also physically talented. And then on the outside, you want to, pay attention to Mace Funa, number 47, edge rush type guy, was a player that was a highly regarded recruit coming out of Southern California. A lot of big schools wanted him, and he's turned into a guy that's going to have an NFL future. I'm not going to say he's going to be a first or second rounder, but NFL teams are certainly watching him when they come to practice.
Yeah. Now, when you look at what are the keys to the game for each team, like let's start with Oregon. For them to win this game, what are like 3 things that need to happen? And same thing for Ohio State. If Ohio State wants to win this game, the way they're supposed to per Vegas or whatnot, like what does each team need to happen for them to come away with a victory here?
Yeah, for Oregon, they've got to be able to be balanced on the offensive side of the football. That means they've got to be effective running the football, but Anthony Brown also has to be able to connect on some of these deep passes that he did not connect on as often as he did against Fresno State. They've got to be able to loosen up the pressure. I think Fresno State in the second half and in the second quarter, they kind of brought their safeties down and really dared Oregon to throw the football. And there was some times where it worked. They completed a couple big passes. There were times where they generated a pass interference call on Fresno State to move the ball down the field. And then other times they just flat out couldn't complete it and couldn't execute the play even remotely close to how it was supposed to be done. So I think for Oregon to win this game, they've got to be able to have balance on the offensive side of the football. They have to make Ohio State respect the pass so they can't drop their safeties close to the line of scrimmage and really shut down that run game. Defensively, I think everyone kind of gravitates towards Ohio State's receivers, best receiving core they're going to play. Oregon will, 2 first-round draft pick guys at that spot. CJ Stroud clearly showed that when he's on, he can be pretty good. But I think for Oregon to stop that, it starts up front, and they've got to generate pass cover, a pass rush against Ohio State. And if you can get to CJ Stroud and you can make him speed up a little bit, throw the ball maybe a little earlier than he wants to, or what the play calls for, that will alleviate the pressure that Oregon's secondary will be facing against Ohio State. Correct me if I'm wrong here, but I don't think Ohio State is this, quick strike offense where it's snap the ball's out of the hand in 1 or 2 seconds, kind of like a Texas Tech or some of those Arizona Cardinal NFL teams that are pure throwing the football spread stuff. It feels like Ohio State's banks on the play action. They do have some plays that take some time to develop downfield, and yeah, every school has those quick strikes, but it's not an air raid passing attack where the quarterback has the ball only for a split second before he gets rid of it. So if you're Oregon, you got to get to CJ Stroud. You got to get pressure on him. If you don't get pressure on him, he has all day to throw. You're going to get picked apart because those receivers, if you give them time, they'll find a way to get wide open. And like we saw against Minnesota, if they catch the ball and there's no one around them, you're not going to catch them. They're going to score touchdowns, or at minimum, they're going to get huge gains. So for Oregon, they've got to get to the quarterback and shorten that time that he has the football.
Yeah, and for Ohio State, I guess some of that goes in turn. I mean, if you're Ohio State, and what are the things you need to do against Oregon to make sure that you come away with a win?
I think if you're Oregon or if you're Ohio State, you want to dominate the line of scrimmage on both sides of the football. And that seems very cliche, but if you make Oregon a one-dimensional team on offense, and I think if you had to pick your poison, you want Oregon throwing the football 50 times in this football game, 40 times, 45 times in this football game. So if you force Oregon's run game to be basically nothing, and Oregon has to just revolt to throwing the football almost every down, you're putting yourself in a really good position. And then when you do have the football, if you can dominate the line of scrimmage and get yards on first down, positive gains, and put yourself in a 2nd and 3 or a 2nd and 4, that gives you everything on the playbook. And you can then do the play action pass, because Oregon's going to be so worried about, hey, we're giving up 6-7 yards per carry. We really got to sell out to stop the run, because if we don't, they're just going to run the ball every time. And that's what allows you to do the play action, go over the top of this defense and get in those one-on-one situations where if a receiver can get space, he could go for a touchdown. So I think it's very cliche, but I really think for Ohio State, if you dominate the line of scrimmage on both sides and make Oregon one-dimensional, and then force Oregon to really have to worry about that run game, Ohio State will walk out of that game with a good victory, and they'll be feeling really good about how they played on both sides of the football.
Yeah, and Ohio State with a lot of question marks in the secondary. We don't know if Sevyn Banks or Cameron Brown, their 2 starting cornerbacks who they were out or without for Minnesota. We don't know if they're going to play. Josh Proctor got dinged up at the end of that Minnesota game. We don't know the severity of his injury and if he's going to play. And so I think, Ohio State, if they can not have to play some of their young secondary guys so aggressively and press man-to-man coverage, and they kind of, almost like, sure, Anthony Brown, dink and dunk me down the field. Let's see if you can do that. Almost a bend but don't break type defense. I think they'd much prefer to be in that and know that the pass is coming, versus have to maybe be a little bit in a closer game where Oregon's a little bit more balanced and they're kind of on the heels of their feet. So that definitely will be interesting. Now, finally, to wrap this up, let's talk about your prediction for the game. How do you think this game plays out, and what's your score prediction?
I think Oregon's offense will be significantly better this time around than they were against Fresno State. I do worry about Oregon's ability to if this game turns into a shootout, I do worry if Oregon can match, big play after big play with Ohio State. So this is a game in which if it's played in the low 30s or below, I like Oregon's chances here. If this game is played in the high 30s into the 40s, I like Ohio State's chances here to win this football game. I have Ohio State winning. I have them winning 49-38. I do think Oregon covers the 14-point spread. And I think it's going to be a game in which in the second half or late in the first half, it might be a case where Oregon's losing by 3 scores. But I think in the fourth quarter, there's going to be an opportunity where Oregon could have a chance to either tie or take the lead, or really make this it's like a 2-point game now if they can score a touchdown. I think there's going to be an opportunity for Oregon in the fourth quarter to really make this thing interesting. Do they take care of the opportunity at hand and capitalize on it? I don't think so. So I think this is going to be one where it's competitive throughout most of the game. There will be some stretches where it maybe gets a little ugly for Oregon, but they walk out of there. They're not going to be happy that they covered the spread, but I think they walk out of there with an idea that they, a player here or there goes their way. It might have been a different outcome, but they lose 49-38.
Yeah. And I think the interesting thing is, regardless of the result of this game, whoever loses technically is not going to be knocked out of the college football playoff picture. Obviously, you don't have any more room for error. You have to kind of run the table and win your conference championship. But I think at 12-1, Ohio State is the Big Ten champ, with their only loss being to a really good Oregon team. Probably still puts them in the playoff, obviously, depending what the rest of the picture looks like. And if Oregon loses on the road against Ohio State early in the year with KT hurt and maybe some other guys missing, and then goes on to run the table in the Pac-12, and I think I wouldn't say is probably as much of a guarantee from a percentage standpoint, but I think they'd have a pretty good shot to make the college football playoff at that point. And just to comment, I'm not 100% on my pick yet. That will come out Friday on BuckeyesScoop.com. So some of you, by the time you're listening to this, it might already be out. But I'm kind of thinking similar, about an 11-point game. But I think it's going to be pretty close throughout. I think it's going to be, continuously getting to 4 and then 11 and then 4 and then 11 and back and forth. I'm not going to say the game's never going to be in doubt for Ohio State, but I think it's going to be just comfortable enough where Ohio State doesn't really feel like they're going to lose, but always within striking distance for Oregon. I think it's going to be a little lower scoring. I'm going to maybe say something along the lines of like 38-27, 34-27. I think Oregon is going to cover the spread. I think Ohio State missing a few players, still being inexperienced. I think Oregon's going to be able to take advantage of that in some ways on offense. And I think the Oregon defense is much better than people think. It's kind of funny when you were saying if it's in the lower 30s and 20s, you think you like Oregon, and in the 40s, Ohio State. And 10 years ago, you would have laughed at that statement covering Oregon. But Matt, really appreciate the breakdown. Looking forward to a tremendous game between these two teams this weekend. And, appreciate you coming on. For those listening, you can follow him on Twitter at Matt Prehm. That's at MATTPREHM. Give him a follow, a great follow for Ohio State's opponent this week to know everything about the Ducks. Thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you next week.
This episode of Around the Oval was brought to you by Todd Pennington with Revolution Mortgage. If you've been thinking about refinancing or buying a house, check out our sponsor, Todd Pennington with Revolution Mortgage. They offer low rates for refinancing and home purchase loans, including first-time home buyer programs, down payment assistance, and cash-out home equity loans. Check out revolutionmortgage.com/tpennington.